This is day 4 of quarantine due to the coronavirus, and there is no end in sight. But the one good thing about this quarantine is I have all the time in the world to create. Classes have moved online. My place of employment has been shut down, at least for the foreseeable future. But good news for you is you get to learn all about lenses, everything from what the little numbers on the front of your lens mean, all the way to the differences between cheap and expensive lenses, and of course, everything in between. Are you excited? I'm excited. Before I forget, my name is Bradley Goss, and on this channel I provide tips and tricks to filmmakers and photographers to help take their creative work to that next level. If that's something you might be interested in, please consider subscribing. Otherwise, let's talk about lenses. So first and foremost, there are two types of lenses, that being zoom and prime lenses. Zoom lenses have multiple focal lengths, say 18 to 55 or 70 to 300, whereas prime, you're stuck to one. If you got a 50mm lens, you're shooting on a 50mm. There is no room for adjustment. So because most of you are probably shooting on a zoom lens, especially if you're a beginner, say you bought your camera body and it came with the lens, it's probably a kit lens like this one, which is a 55 to 250mm focal length, and typically their apertures range from a minimum of 3.5 to 5.6, depending on where you are on your focal length. I would say the most common type of kit lens is an 18 to 55, one of which I have right here. And again, this is a 3.5 to 5.6 aperture. We'll get into what that actually means in a section here in just a moment. So the reasons cheaper lenses have that range of 3.5 to 5.6 is because as you zoom in, your minimum aperture increases. And with expensive lens, you don't actually get that, but that's why they are more expensive. Again, I'll talk about that at the end of the video. So moving into prime lenses, I am actually shooting on a prime lens right now. It's a 50mm f1.8, meaning my aperture can open to the measurement of 1.8, but we'll talk about that again, of course, later. I feel like I'm saying we'll talk about that later. We'll get to it. So the two types of lenses for the prime lenses, and this is standard in the film industry, it's the manual lens and the automatic lens, most consumer camera lenses are automatic. The one that I'm using now is automatic, but it can be set to manual focus. And then manual lenses, as the name suggests, are only manual focus, and these are used on higher level film sets. You're never gonna find a zoom lens or a automatic lens on a professional film set. So probably the most important thing to know about lenses right off the bat as a beginner is what focal lengths actually mean. By now, you've probably figured it out, but the lower the focal length, the wider your field of view, and the higher, the narrower. Now, there are optical differences between the two, but that's a topic for another video because it gets very advanced and goes into techniques cinematographers and DPs will use on film sets, but again, it's a topic for another video. Otherwise, this video would be about 20 minutes long. So scientifically, if one of your friends asks, like, what is the focal length, you can actually really blow them away with this very simple explanation. It is the physical measurement of the distance between the camera sensor and the optical center of the lens. The optical center of the lens is the point in which the image is flipped upside down before it hits the sensor, much like our eyes do before what we are seeing, the information of what we are seeing with our eyes actually hits our brain. And then, as I mentioned before, f-stops are how much light is allowed to enter the camera. So again, with cheaper lenses ranging from 3.5 to 5.6 f-stop, they're not letting as much light into the lens as, say, the lens I'm using right now, which is a 1.8, which I currently have opened all the way to 1.8. So one more thing to note with f-stops, the lower you go, the shallower your depth of field. So you get those really cinematic looks where the background is blurred. With higher f-stops, everything becomes in focus and it just feels very flat. So another one of those numbers that is on the front of your lens is the diameter. So a lot of tests have been actually done to see if a wider lens diameter is beneficial in terms of quality over a smaller diameter, but it's not really conclusive and nobody's gonna be able to tell with the naked eye about whether one image looks better than the other or not. Basically, the most important thing to note is when you're buying a filter, making sure that you're buying the same diameter as your lens, otherwise it's not gonna fit. Now, there are adapters that you can buy to make a filter fit on a lens that has a different diameter, but as with anything, if you can just go straight to it, fits as is, it's always gonna be your best option. Another very important thing to note about that, diameter is not the same as your focal length. So you can find the diameter on the front of your lens here. It's a number next to a circle with a line through it. That's your lens diameter. Again, it is not your focal length. These are two different things. And then the last number that's on the front of your lens is your minimum focal distance. This is usually a metric measurement followed by an English measurement. And this is really simple. It's just how close can you get your subject to your lens before it can't focus any closer. So if something gets too close to the lens, it's not gonna be able to focus. Usually that lens, I think mine is 0.45 meters on the one I'm using now. So that's as close as I can get and have something still in focus. If I go any closer, it will not be able to focus no matter what you do. So now we're gonna get into what the rings on lenses actually mean. So the first ring I'm going to talk about here is your focal distance ring, and it's marked with printed numbers of what your focal length is at, and you're just turning that to change that focal length. As you can see with this one, it's zooming in and out as I change this ring. The second ring is your focus ring, and this only matters again if you're in manual, but you would just turn this focus ring, and a lot of times it's actually labeled. On cinema lenses it is, but these are, again, like I said before, very expensive. But just turning this ring will change what plane is in focus. And then the third ring, which I actually don't have a lens that has this third ring because I don't own any cinema lenses. But again, you'll find this on expensive film set, high-end production houses will have these. But basically, instead of having an aperture adjustment on your touchscreen on the body of your camera, or just a ring on the body of your camera, the aperture ring is actually on the lens itself, and that's how you adjust it. So when you're looking into buying a new lens, lens mounts are also very important because each brand has its own lens mount, and even within brands, they can have different mounts. So if you have a Sony, you're not gonna go buy a DSLR mount if you have a mirrorless Sony camera because it's not gonna fit. The easiest way to determine what mount you have is either a quick Google search, or if you take the lens off your camera, your mount should be labeled with the type of mount, and then the lens will also be labeled at the base of the lens. So make sure when you're buying a new lens, make sure that the mount matches the mount of your body camera. Or camera body, you know what I mean. Now there are some brands that actually don't have camera bodies, like Sigma, which I'm going to talk about in just a second here. But basically you can put those on any camera if you just buy the right adapter. So you have two choices. If you have a lens that does not fit your body, you can either send that lens back and buy the version that has the right mount. Otherwise, you can buy an adapter and that lens will work perfectly fine. So last but not least, what really is the difference between that cheap and expensive lens? Is it really worth upgrading to this lens for $1,000 extra even though it has the same specs? Depends on what you're using them for. The biggest difference comes down to the quality of the glass used to craft the lens. Higher end lenses offer a sharper, cleaner image than lower end, cheaply crafted lenses. One example of a higher end would be the Sony G Master series, but unless you've got a couple $1,000s to spend on a lens, it's probably not worth going for. If you do want something a little cheaper, Rokinon is a decent brand. However, I wouldn't personally recommend them. They have a reputation of giving soft images and they look slightly out of focus even though they were in perfect focus when you shot them. If you want a good middle ground, Sigma is a great brand to go with. I mentioned them earlier. They do make camera lenses for pretty much every camera body out there. And if not, they have adapters that you can buy for super cheap to make any lens work. A decent lens will cost you around $1,200, which really is not that much considering what is on the rest of the market. And one more thing, I briefly mentioned it before, another thing that makes the difference between a cheap and expensive lens is your minimum aperture. So typically 2.8, 1.8 is about as low as most consumer lenses go. But if you're willing to spend an extra $1,000 to go from 1.8 to say a 1.4 or a 1.2, and you really want to get that shallow depth of field, want more light in your image, those are definitely the lenses that you're going to want to go with. But again, unless you've got the extra $1,000, it's not worth going from a 1.8 to a 1.4. So there you have it, pretty much everything you need to know about camera lenses. If you have any questions that I did not answer in this video, feel free to leave a comment down below or DM me on Instagram. I love hearing from people that watch my channel. I hope you got some value out of this, hope you learned something new, and if you did, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. I would greatly appreciate it. Otherwise, stay inspired, and I will see you guys in the next video. Oh. My laptop's supposed to stay, or the thing, what is it? The desktop supposed to stay on to provide a more dynamic background, but it turned off. Anyways, I will see you guys in the next video. Okay, guess that's it.